Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Tech Bytes review. Today we are going to be reviewing the GameBall Trackball. Now I know it's been quite a while since I've done the unboxing video for this particular device, but due to my vacation schedule, I just hadn't had time to put the video together until now. But now that I'm back, I have a lot to say about this trackball. Overall, it's very positive, but I do have a few things that I'd like to dig into just a little bit more. Also, I would like to remind you to like and subscribe to this channel if you like this content. It helps me out a ton and helps to let me know that you guys are enjoying the content that I'm producing. Also, I really appreciate everybody and their comments, so if you would like to leave a comment on this video, I do read all of them, and I do appreciate all of the feedback and recommendations for future videos as well. All right, let's get back into the review. Moving into the build quality side of things like we usually do, I would like to point out one thing that jumped out at me when I first did the unboxing for this particular GameBall Trackball, and that is just how well put together the device actually is. I must say when I first heard about GameBall, especially with them being kind of a newer company, smaller team, and this being their first product, I really didn't know what to expect in terms of build quality and how well it would all come packaged and how nicely it would be put together. But I can honestly say that this is absolutely on par with what you would get from something like Logitech or Kensington. And in a lot of cases, it's even better than many of the Elecom products. There's absolutely no case creak, nothing along those lines, and everything is very, very well put together. There's really no ugly seams in the plastic or anything like that. I mean, they really did a fantastic job, and you can tell that there was a lot of thought and work put into producing a very nice, cohesive unit. So I do appreciate the amount of time that they took in getting this right, because it definitely shows. Now, taking a look at the chassis itself, you can barely see it, but this is actually a two-part case. They did such a good job with the seam and matching these two ends up that it does look like it's actually one piece. So I really had to take some time to look at it, but there is a top portion and a bottom portion of this particular GameBall Trackball. The top portion appears to be some form of hard PBT plastic, but it is textured with like this really silky, glossy, smooth type of material on top. Now, at first glance, this does appear to be like that rubbery, grippy type of cover that they put on something like the MX Ergo, but it's actually not. This isn't spongy at all, and I know some people love that, some people hate it, and so I think the decision to go with something that isn't just raw plastic, this is kind of that silky smooth, it's still textured, but it's not that polarizing, grippy, rubbery stuff. I think that was an excellent decision on their part here at GameBall, because it doesn't split the community one way or the other. I know a lot of people had issues with hand sweat due to the grippiness and the rubberiness of the MX Ergo. You really won't find that with this trackball at all, given that it's just a really glossy, hard plastic. So again, not spongy, but still textured to an extent, and it feels very nice on the top portion of the chassis itself. Moving on to the back of the device, one of the first things that you'll notice is the lack of hole for that nasty gunk stuff and buildup to fall out of. Now, this was originally a pretty big concern of mine, because I really had concerns around how well this would be maintained and how easy it would be to clean out, because with trackballs, it's kind of a weekly chore that you go through cleaning that out. And I will say the lack of hole does mean that it is a little bit more difficult to clean, because you can't just push everything out of the hole at the bottom. But at the same time, it's really not that bad. It takes maybe an extra 15 seconds to clean the bearings out and everything else from that little cavity that the ball sits in. But not having the hole really isn't a deal breaker. I didn't expect it to be, but at the same time, I was a little concerned about it, but luckily that was unfounded. The lack of hole, this is not the hole. This is just something. I couldn't quite figure out what that is, but this does not have a hole for the junk to fall out of. And short of that, there really is nothing else on the back of the device. I do like that they've used kind of this inlaid sticker. A lot of the cheaper trackballs and even some of the Elecoms have just a really cheapo sticker that just peels right off. This just adds to the professionalism of the device and makes it feel like it's a very premium product, which it is. The one thing that I did have to comment, and that I do find slightly unfortunate, is that all of the screws, not just some, but all of the screws are hidden behind what I'm assuming to be are the feet here. Now, I didn't peel any of these off to check because I didn't want to damage it, but I do believe that the screws are probably going to be located underneath each of these 4 feet. It's actually the most hidden type of type of thing I've seen like that for the screws. Most of them will at least have 1 or 2 screws that are out here, but this one, they're all hidden. It makes it look nicer, but at the same time, you can't resolder switches very easily unless you want to go in there and peel off some of these foot pads. I do wish that it had more access to the internals. I think X keys, the L track, is by far the gold standard for that. They want you to go in there and mess with the device. But I also understand that a lot of manufacturers aren't geared towards more of the hobbyist or tinkerer community. So I think for what it is, I think this is going to suit almost everybody perfectly fine. But I did want to point out there are no easy access to the screws on this particular device. Moving on to the buttons, this is where you start to see a lot of similarities between both the GameBall and the Logitech Trackman Marble. In fact, Eric with GameBall had even mentioned that they did take quite a bit of design inspiration from that particular Logitech device, and it really shows. And I think that is an excellent decision to model their device off of something tried and true like the Trackman Marble. And you can see it with the way that the buttons are laid out on the side. It gives this nice ambidextrous approach to the trackball device. Now, one of the things that the buttons usually suffer from whenever you get these long buttons like this, you see it a lot in the Kensington devices and even some of the Elocoms, is that whenever you push on maybe the end that isn't hovering over the actual switch itself, it may be a little bit harder to depress. Luckily, with the GameBall, that is not an issue at all. No matter where you press on this button, you're going to actuate the underlying switch with the exact same amount of force required. I haven't found any weird spots or rough spots on the buttons. It's just always a very nice click every single time you press it, regardless of the button. Even their smaller offset buttons here are sitting on top of what I assume to be Omron switches. So everything feels very great. If we're looking at the number of buttons that this device has, there's a couple more actually because of the touchpad up here, but in terms of physical buttons, we have 6. So we're going to have our left click, right click, back arrow, forward arrow, middle mouse button click, and then the DPS button click as well right there. So there are 6 buttons overall. You can use software to remap them, but there is no third-party software that comes with this device. And many of these buttons, for instance, the left click and the back arrow here, can be switched on the onboard firmware by just pressing a combination of buttons here on the device itself. And then therefore, whenever you go and plug that into another computer, you don't have to worry about your switches or your settings staying or sticking because they're already going to be saved to the device. I love that type of setup, and I think they did an excellent job of integrating that here in the device. So the buttons themselves get a giant thumbs up. I think they did a fantastic job. They are contoured a little bit, which will lend itself to a few funky things going on with the usability side, but we'll save that for that section of the video. Moving on to the ball in the GameBall Trackball. This was another thing that stood out for me almost immediately when I did the unboxing video. And then as soon as I plugged it in and actually started using the device, I realized just how good the ball actually is. I'm going to say this, and there may be people that disagree with me, but I truly believe that this is the smoothest trackball that you can buy on the market out of the box without modifying the bearings. I have not encountered anything this smooth from any other device. The closest that I've come is the old school M570 from Logitech and one of the older versions of the Logitech Trackman Marble. Logitech has since gone downhill, it seems, with the quality of their ball and bearings, and they tend to be a little bit more scratchy, but this has one of the best feels and the most fluid, liquid smooth rolling experiences I've ever encountered with a trackball. It's absolutely incredible. I don't know how they do it, because if we take a look at the inside, they do appear to just be regular zirconium bearings, but it's designed in such a way and the ball is of such good quality that you don't run into any stiction or any kind of unnecessary rough spots while using this day to day. So the ball is absolutely fantastic. Moving into the touchpad here. Now this is one of the absolute biggest features for me personally, because I love the Trackman Marble, but it doesn't have scrolling, and that's why I couldn't end up using it, even though the design itself was one of my favorites. This remedied that by using a touchpad right around the ball. So somewhat similar to the concept of like a Kensington Expert where they have a scroll ring, except this one is a touch pad. So on the left-hand side, you have your horizontal scroll. Here you would have your vertical scroll on the right-hand side, you have a settings button, and then you also have a light button, which will change the color of the LED down here. Different combinations of these will also tweak different settings, but moving into the actual build quality of the touchpad, one of the first things that I had concerns about was if the touchpad would be able to withstand day-to-day use or if it would be a little bit clunky. I'm sure we can all remember back 10, 12 years ago when laptops were first coming out and the touchpads on some of the cheaper laptops were really, really crappy. And it was, you'd move a little bit and it was just really clunky and it didn't register on your finger right and it only worked half the time. I was a little concerned that if they skimped on the actual touchpad components, that would be the case here. But I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, that is not the case. This is a really, really good touchpad that they have in here. Despite its appearance, the technology that it's using, it works every time. I've never had a moment where I wanted to scroll and it didn't scroll. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And we'll cover this on the usability, but I've had more of an issue with getting it to not scroll when I don't want it to scroll. But this absolutely, it's a very sensitive touchpad and it will pick up your finger with just the lightest touch, just dragging across. I've never had it about a month now that I've been using this. I've never had it one time skip when I wanted to actually scroll. So I can say that as far as the scroll side and the build quality of the sensors that they use for the scroll pad and the entire touchpad unit, fantastic, giant thumbs up. Really, aside from that, everything else is pretty standard. It's a USB plug-in. There is no Bluetooth option. There is no wireless option for this. It is only wired, which is the way I prefer it. So for me, this is perfect. And that concludes the build quality side of the GameBall Trackball. Overall, absolutely stellar job putting this thing together. Especially for a first product, it can't be overstated. I mean, they did a very good job of making this feel like a very premium product, and what they produced is something they should definitely be proud of. Moving into the usability side of things, this is where I had two minor issues with the GameBall Trackball. Now, overall, the usability is phenomenal with the GameBall. So don't let the fact that I have some issues with it deter you from buying one or progressing with one of these. But I did think that they were worthy of mentioning. Now, the first issue that I encountered was due to the design of the buttons themselves, kind of this contoured shape and the placement of them. And the second issue that I had was with the design decision to go with a touchpad instead of a physical scroll wheel of some kind. Now, before we jump into the buttons and everything, I would like to use the Logitech Trackman Marble as kind of a prop just to hopefully clarify what my issues are and kind of describe them a little bit better. So if you watch the review that I did on the Trackman Marble, you'll know that one of the big selling points for me was the fact that you could hold this in any way you wanted to, any kind of claw grip, any kind of, up front or down back. You could really hold it any way. And because of just how simple the design was, the device didn't dictate how you were supposed to hold it. If I wanted to hold it back here and push on the back end of the button, I could. If I wanted to hold it up here and push on the front end of the button, absolutely no problem. I mean, it's just a very, very simple standard trackball design. Works both left-handed, right-handed, ambidextrous, checks all those boxes, and doesn't really force any kind of design decision on you as the end user. Now, moving into the GameBall, one of the things that we see, and when I first went to go use it, and one of the things I struggled with right off the bat was that I wanted to hold it back. I always like using fingertip trackballs with the very, very tips of my fingers, and because of that, I have my wrist resting on the desk like this. And you can see from the side, this is the left click button by default out of the box. And so you're left with just this tiny little portion to press on. And over here on the right-hand side, you use your ring finger to hit the right mouse button. And it just didn't really work out too well for me. I tried it for a couple days and I just wasn't having a whole lot of luck getting the hang of it. At the time I was playing a lot of Lost Ark, which is an ARPG. It's a top-down game. I was using that as kind of a test case for this. And it was really, really struggling with the point and click action, having only this tiny little piece of the button to press. So I consulted the manual, and sure enough, there's a way to switch the left and back arrow buttons, and that allows me to press down here as the left mouse button and use this as my back arrow. But there isn't an option to switch these two over here. So you do have to remember, you're using this as your left mouse button and this as your right click. And the whole awkwardness of it, I couldn't remember, muscle memory wasn't working for me. So finally I just said, okay, let's go back to the default. This will be my left mouse button. And I pushed my hand up like this, and voila, everything started working the way that it should. You know, this is my left mouse button. I have my right mouse button, very easily accessible with my ring finger over here. And it fits much more naturally in the hand than if I were to try to use it back like this. This is the way I used the Trackman Marble. The Trackman Marble didn't care. This is the way that I had to kind of use GameBall because it does force you into that kind of grip. Not to say that you can't work around it. Everybody has different ways of holding it. Everybody has different sized hands. But for me, I would prefer to have a little bit less stylized buttons. Maybe if they were just a little bit more comparable to like the Trackman Marble, just ovals, like little teardrop shapes instead of that stylized button. That would completely alleviate any issues that you had here. Maybe this button needs to be moved somewhere else if you extended the footprint of this button to make it more of an oval. But overall, it's a fantastic device. The buttons themselves worked great. I just had issues with being forced a little bit into holding it in this particular way. But again, once I got used to it, I really didn't encounter any issues. Now, moving on to the second point that I did have a slight issue with was the sensitivity of the touchpad itself. I think with physical scroll wheels, you really don't have this issue because you physically have to nudge the device. And so if we go back to my example of how I was holding the GameBall, if you're holding it the way that the default settings kind of dictate, this is really the way that it's expected to be held. Now this leaves your middle finger floating around in no man's land. And so for me, it got tiring after a while. So I would rest my middle finger here on the right-hand side of the touchpad. Now for most day-to-day business applications and things and using it for day-to-day computing activities, it's not really an issue because they have some software that you can enable and disable to disable the scroll when the ball is being used and disable the ball when the scroll is being used. You could turn that on and off. It's all on board. But for me, I fiddled around with those settings for a while. And whenever I was playing a game, resting my finger here just kept accidentally zooming in. And in the case of my Lost Ark game that I was playing, I kept zooming in on my character's butt when I didn't want to. So what that meant was in order for me to use it for that particular type of game, I had to have my middle finger floating up here, which really got tiring after a while. I couldn't really work around it. It was something that I just got used to. I think I built up the muscle in my finger enough that I just stopped noticing it. So it's not something that I would say should stop you from buying it because it really is a solid device, but it is something to note. And it is something that I think if there was a GameBall 2.0, I would love to see it have a physical scroll wheel similar to like a Kensington Expert. In my personal opinion, having a really solid scroll is much better than having both horizontal and vertical. Now, there's many people that may disagree with me, but I would rather sacrifice the horizontal scroll for just having a physical scroll ring, if that's all that could fit up here. But really, aside from that, if I wanted to go into the usability of the device, if you're using this for FPS games, if you're using this for most MMORPGs, or even business applications, I use this heavily with Visual Studio in my day-to-day coding. I'm a C++ developer, and using all of these different buttons and the fluidity of the ball, I mean, it's a very premium trackball. And if you loved the Trackman Marble for being that kind of fingertip trackball that allowed you to use your fingers in this way, you're going to love this. There's absolutely no reason to not go after this. And the two minor issues that I had were very specific to gaming and very specific to ARPGs, action RPGs. So unless you're a professional ARPG gamer, or that's the majority of your life, I wouldn't let those issues that I had stop you from getting this particular trackball. Again, the ball is one of the smoothest, I could say that without a doubt, the smoothest ball that I've used out of the box on a trackball. The buttons themselves all work perfectly. The onboard firmware is huge because if you're somebody that likes to plug and play in different computers, you're not going to have any issues with that here. Again, it does have a few minor issues that I think could easily be worked out with maybe a 2.0 design or just adapting to the trackball, which is something that generally you kind of have to do. You grow with the trackball is generally the way these things go. And that really summarizes the everything I had to say about the usability side of things. Overall, for what it is and for being a first release from the GameBall team, I think it's fantastic. I really, really do. I've definitely enjoyed using it. I will continue to enjoy using it. I just might not use it for my ARPG games, but overall, I wouldn't let that stop anybody from looking into it. It's a very good device. Finally, moving into the summary and recommendation side of things. The big question is and always will be, would I recommend the GameBall for your average user? Well, let's take a second to break that one down here. So average user in my mind is the larger target audience, people who really only use email or Outlook or things like that. And I think for what the GameBall is, being a premium trackball with a premium price tag associated with it, I don't know that your average business person, your average, just anybody using a computer, I don't know that this would be the trackball for them. But then again, it's also not targeted for them. So for an average user base, I don't know that I would recommend it strictly due to the price tag. Now, going into the target audience, which would be somebody who's either very serious about trackballs, which I assume most of us are here, or somebody who's an avid gamer and maybe has wrist pain and is looking to find a different alternative to that. We're all used to spending money for good premium products that we expect a lot out of, and this does not disappoint in the slightest. I would absolutely recommend anybody watching this video, because I'm assuming you're in the target audience of the GameBall, being somebody who likes these premium trackballs, I would say go for it. You're really not going to be disappointed. Yes, it does have a few things that take a little bit of getting used to, like the contoured button design. Yes, I think the touchpad could maybe use a little bit of work, or maybe it just needs me getting a little bit more used to. But overall, I think it's a fantastic product. I would recommend it to anybody who's into premium trackballs or who's considering buying one. I think it blows away the competition in terms of its build quality. I think it blows away the competition in terms of the smoothness of the trackball, which in my mind is the most important feature of a trackball device. It's in the name, ball, trackball. And this does everything very well, all to be completed and topped off with the onboard firmware settings, which is a massive, massive thumbs up for me. I hate using third-party software. I would say if you're on the fence, then go for it. You're not going to be disappointed. It's a very good trackball. Based on the build quality and the way it feels, I expect it to last me for many, many years. And that concludes today's review, everybody. Thank you for watching. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Also, please leave your comments and feedback. I love reading those, and I appreciate any recommendations for future videos. Thank you again, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.